I got news for you guys. You're the 1%. And you're the 1%, financially you may be the 1%, but you're certainly the 1% intellectually. And so I come here to represent the other 99% and to explain to you that my work is not, I'm not an academic, not a technologist, not an economist. I'm not here to download my research to you. So it's gonna be a very different type of presentation. What I do is I take your research. I'm a designer with an MBA. I turned it into conceptual visuals to try to explain to the other 99% what's coming at them. So, yeah. So I say I work at the future of work and the future of learning, and I think it's interesting to explain how this happened. I wrote an article on LinkedIn in 2014 called "Jobs Are Over." It went viral in 3 days. 100,000 people had read it, and it led to speaking requests all over the world. This morning, they picked me as their non-influencer category, the #1 person to follow in education. So I am an interloper into your community. This is what I see happening. So we used to live in these three bands: education, career, retire. Whether you went to university or not, you stepped on that career ladder somewhere between 18 and 30. You retired about 65. You died a year or so later. That was the model. That was the plan. And maybe some of you in the room worked on that plan. And we determined success based upon where you stepped on that ladder. So the success for higher ed in the other 99% of the world is, did you get a job? How good was that job? And what was your starting salary? We're still ruled by that paradigm, even though it's no longer relevant, I think. I think it looks more like this now. The expectation may not be 90, but it will be soon in the developed world. Education, career, retire gets replaced by learn, leverage, longevity. And the career ladder is now a web. And the success measure needs to move from your starting salary to learning agility and adaptability. So the mantra that I use in the name of my organization is, in the past we learned something in order to do it. We learned in order to work. And now we're going to have to work in order to learn continuously. So to set some context for that. In the US, a small business is a company with less than 500 employees. You know what? I looked that up because I'm not a mathematician. I was always told the alligator ate the bigger number, right? The alligator always ate the bigger number. Okay, so my point was less than 500. So, thanks, Vin. There are a lot of companies that are much, much smaller than that, and they're a very fast-growing segment, and we're paying no attention to them. So if you look at the 0 employees category, that's people like me, companies of 1, otherwise known as me Inc. We have 24 million of them right now, producing $1 trillion in revenue, up from 15 million in 1997. There's a lot to consider about this category, not only in terms of policy and services, but how do we prepare this category for work? We're all assuming that we're sending people to work to get jobs. What if we're sending them for something else? This, I'm a little suspicious of because the data comes from Upwork and the Freelancers Union, so they have a little bit of a vested interest in this. They say that the non-freelancer or the employee category is going to look like this in the next 10 years, and the freelancer category is going to look like this. Either way, we know the freelancer category is growing a lot. I don't know that it's going to eclipse the employee category, but it's their wish. So if we look back over the last 100 years of the biggest companies by market cap, in 1917, if you look at them, 4 out of 5 at least were the extraction of value from natural assets. And then you look 50 years later, it was the scalable production, to use John Hagel's word, of human-made assets. And if you look at now, it's the deployment and reinvention of digital assets, which requires scalable learning. So our world, I don't know that our world ever looked like this outside the manufacturing part, but this is how we taught. This is how we organize. We break things down into neat little components. We deliver it in little packets. I call it the complicated world. I think in reality, especially now, it looks like this, but we don't teach like this, we don't organize like this. If you think in your organization 10, 20 years ago, if you were a middle-level manager, a senior-level manager, you'd sat in all the chairs you'd managed. You pretty much had all that experience. So you had the expertise to make decisions. Now you're hiring many people who have knowledge and skills that you don't have. So knowledge is coming in at different layers of the organization, and I think we have to think differently about how we organize, not only work and learn. So I'm out of my depth making these comments here, but the past 10 years, 20 years, we've had these three major revolutions. Ahead we have these. I've been told from the people that I refer to for this information that the two biggest ones to disrupt sort of the knowledge work are process AI and social AI because they're software-based, inexpensive, and can scale very quickly. I say that we are entering the fifth era in human history, the augmented era, but our mental models are stuck between the industrial and the information era. And if we zero in on that, each era is dropping by a factor of 10, so they're happening much more quickly. They're focused on how we value talent and how we use tools. And we're still asking people to declare their major to start school. We're focused on your knowledge, focused on the content and transfer of that knowledge. So we're living longer at a time that things conceivably could be changing much more quickly. This is based upon Moore's law, but then I take your point that in 1900, when things were start flying in the sky, maybe it was different then, but the reality is that we're living longer, so that suggests we're going to live through more paradigm shifts. So we need to prepare people to adapt, and we're not doing that. So the kind of learn thing, to use Asimov's, we really need to learn, unlearn, and relearn. We need to talk explicitly about that, which we still do not. We talk about the automation of work, but we don't talk about the atomization of work. So if you take a task and it's complex and ambiguous, right now the human employee is the best way to achieve that. But if you can isolate that task and you make it discrete, particularly if it's digital, you can atomize it. So, the rooms and rides, that in terms of Uber and Airbnb, but there are many other forms of atomized work. If you can further standardize it, becomes bot. So these are just samples of it, because generally when I talk to people, they don't know what these things are. Calient used to be hourly nerd, so the atomization of work is not just the domain of riders and rooms. Hourly nerd takes a share of a Harvard MBA, and you can buy a share of them. So it's trying to disrupt McKinsey and Deloitte and those kind of folks. This is my theory about the career arc. So if we look over time, this is using historic numbers as kind of the old model. If you entered the workforce at about 23, you started getting into your groove at 35. 45 to 50 was sort of your sweet spot. 55 to 65 was decline, and 70 was about when you died. That was sort of the learn, contribute, retire model. And if you were disrupted from that, there was cause for panic. So this was the old model of what a panic zone looked like. So it was based upon the fact that we presumed you should learn early because of brain plasticity. You acquired expertise in a career on that escalator. You acquired maturity, judgment, and perspective. And in that overlap was kind of considered the high value zone, because you had enough acquired expertise to be valuable, but you still had enough gas in the tank to contribute to the company. So you really wanted to hire a 45-year-old. But then I looked at the median ages of all the sort of new economy companies, which happen to be the top companies right now. They're all sub 30-ish, because they're all digital natives. And if you took that workforce, suggesting they may not even hit the high value zone. So does that mean that as 70 becomes 79 right now, that 45 is the new 35, or 35 is the new 45? So as skills demand are skewing younger and longevity is happening in the other direction, and our median age in the workforce is 40, we have three distinct panic zones. So we have the cost of education, which everybody talks about, the relevance to education, people talk about it. Retirement, because we never plan on a 30-year vacation, people talk about that. I don't think enough people talk about the workforce change panic, because it's not just people who are going to be replaced by robots. It's people who are middle managers in companies who define themselves by only one thing. They went to school in one major, worked in that field, worked in that company, and there's a lot of their psychology is based upon that. Another panic zone has emerged recently that even in the old economy companies, the 45-year-old is not getting their shot anymore because the 60-year-old is still there. That's a phenomenon that's taking place. So you're not seeing the peaks that we used to see. So what do? I think we need to retire these three questions. This is my personal mission. What do you want to be when you grow up? It was probably always a ridiculous question, but it's an increasingly ridiculous question. I know where that 65% came from. I understand it came from a 1999 Bureau of Labor Statistics report that was looking forward at the economy, is that right, being digitized, and they assumed that 65% of those jobs would be turned over. And then the Frey-Osborne model, you can use any percent you want. So jobs are going to change, jobs are going to be automated, or work's going to be automated. So asking people what they want to be when they grow up may be sort of a ridiculous notion. What is your major? In the world I live in, the other 99%, they ask you to declare your major before you start university. You may only get an undergraduate degree. That may be the only formal education you get. And it's all geared towards getting you a starting job that may not even have been there when you started your university. Of that, 27% of people, according to the Federal Bank of New York, live or work in your major. And then what do you do? The Foundation for Young Australians looked at World Economic Forum and McKinsey data and said that young people graduating today in the developed world will have 17 different jobs across 5 different industries. It's the first thing we do here. You're with, I always get that question, and you are, that's how we define ourselves. So I think one of the shifts we need to make is to use John Hagel's knowledge. We used to work in stocks of knowledge. You had to become educated. Now we need to work in flows of knowledge, and I think that's a shift from the I to the T to the X. We originally were educated in deep silos. Then we said we needed T-shaped thinkers because the engineer needs to talk to the designer. Now it's really transdisciplinarity, not just across disciplines, but with biological and non-biological intelligence. So I think we used to learn something in order to do it to produce a unit of value. Now we need to look at it more learn to learn. Learning and doing becomes a combined act. That unit of value becomes a byproduct, because if you look at companies, whether it be Tesla or Google, you're winning by learning faster. So that has to be true of the individual as well. So from an education standpoint, we all have phones, you have applications, you add new applications when you need them, you delete them when you don't. I think a lot of education's been, at least in the 99% I come from, they're in the applications business. How do I download something into the student to create a deployable workforce, rather than developing the operating system in the student so that they can add and delete applications for the rest of their lives? So this is some basic principles that comes from universal learning design. In order to engage a student, focus not on the content, the expression, which is their pursuit of solving a problem, and then the motivation. I think we need to really start focusing on the motivation. If you're gonna have to learn for the rest of your life, we need to start asking why a whole lot more often. Simon Sinek gave a TED Talk in Puget Sound 10 years ago. It was really about how to get leaders to communicate more effectively, companies to communicate more effectively about what they do. He said every company can tell you what they do. Some companies can tell you how they do it. Really great companies will tell you why they do it. And it turns out that that is important not only because it connects more deeply with the customer, but it allows you to go from one product category and one paradigm to another. Amazon started as a bookseller, but then they won Academy Awards. Can't imagine Barnes & Noble exploring space or winning an Academy Award, and there's a reason for that. Amazon starts with I, Google starts with I, Apple starts with Y. And we need to do that with our students. We need to focus on their passion, teaching them how to make their passion productive, and then teaching them how to create value. Those 24 million me inks out there need to know how to operate as businesses of one. So I'm not a psychologist, but this has been explained to me, the Satir change model, am I saying that correctly? That people go through a process when they're going through a state change. We need to help people go through this process because they're gonna have to go through it repeatedly. Moving from one role to the next role, especially as the ones that are in the workforce that have defined themselves this way. So when looking at a pyramid priority in learning, we used to completely ignore the conditions of learning. We would only address your learning needs if you had some sort of deficit. We made sure you had your foundation skills, and then we got you into some sort of domain expertise. Now I think it looks like this. We need to be very explicit about people's learning conditions, not only the motivation, but how they learn, to make sure they can learn effectively for their lives. Focus on their skills being portable. Expectation that their domain expertise is gonna rotate over time, and that they've got to focus on their ability to learn and adapt. So places that I've worked, the kind of things that we've worked on is how do you develop learning agility? How do you focus on uniquely human skills? How do you help with adaptability? How do you help develop agency? I'm working with another group that's worked for the Institute for the Future of Work, and they said that there are 10 skills of the future. The group I've worked with is take those skills and turn them into 3 cluster areas: the art of humanness, the ability to navigate in this new world, and working with bots. and this is how they cluster those 10 skills, and this is geared towards people out in the workforce today. How do we help people out in the workforce today adapt as these changes are coming ahead? So to put it simply, I think the old economy, the life blocks kind of look like this: educate, work, retire, and we kind of moved through it like that for 73 years or so. And now it's going to be more like this. And we need to change our systems, change our mindset, shift our expectations. So in summary, I think the future of work is learning. I think that we need to come up with new questions and new ways to define ourselves. We need to think more about the social emotional support these workers need. It's not just about retraining them. It's about understanding how they define themselves. These shifting life works require us to rethink both work and learning, and we need new institutions to support these emerging realities. So that's...
Take the first question.
All right.
So there is another trend that you didn't mention that's happening, and that's the escalation of the cost of education.
Yep.
So we are now hearing about people who cannot retire because they have yet to retire their student debt.
Right.
And you can see how that is affecting people making educational decisions. So what we are seeing, for example, at Rice, is the flight from the humanities, and students are moving en masse to, for example, to engineering. We have doubled the enrollment to engineering over the past 10 years, and the humanities have declined in half. The answer is because people want to make sure that when they graduate, they can go get a job, they can start paying the student debt. So I wonder where you take this huge burden. I mean, it can go in six figures debt. The students are graduating. How that is affecting this very flexible, very agile world where students graduate with this huge albatross on their shoulders, on their neck. We have to pay the debt.
Yeah, I think I have a theory about where that came from. So between 1960 and 1990, we doubled that number of higher ed institutions in the U.S. And once we did that, we did that because of the women's liberation movement, the GI Bill, and the civil rights movement. We suddenly had a larger market. We also had a greater market demand for educated workforce. So in order to differentiate yourself, suddenly there was this market competition. We had to have better dorms. We had to have marketing. A school was better if they rejected more people. It was called yield. And then the whole ranking system drove that up. That increased its expenditures. I think that's where it came from. I think we need to come up with some new solutions because I don't know that everybody needs a four-year education, at least not a four-year education in that way. Right. Oh, for sure. I think we should think more about it like a gym membership. You go to a gym to keep your body healthy, you should go to a gym to keep your mind healthy.
I appreciate your vision. You keep talking about this we who are going to do things. Like, which we are we talking about? K-12 schools, foundations, state governments, federal governments, universities, firms. I mean, it seems to me we have essentially a political challenge, not an intellectual or design challenge. I would provocate in that regard, at least.
Frankly, all of them.
Okay. Is that a strategy of action? Is that
No, it's just an honest answer. I mean, our K-12 systems right now are still focused on scaling and drilling tests with 1 to 30 students. Our higher ed institutions are focused on who they reject to make them look better, how much endowment they have, and your starting salary. That doesn't benefit anybody. And then our systems of work are screening people based upon whether or not they went to those institutions. So an honest answer is we need to fix all of those things. I have an idea, though. We could swap the education budget and the defense budget.
Yeah. One of the things that I would expect that we would begin to see is some sort of transformation in the institutional settings where people are acquiring these skills. Do you see any examples of that beginning to happen?
You mean in the institutional settings as in educational institutional settings?
Or others, where...
I see that probably innovation is going to come out of the community colleges. I think some of the biggest innovations that have taken place are taking place in the non-elite schools. If you go to an elite school, you're protected by a moat called endowment. You don't have to change. Brown University just announced there's no student debt. Nobody can compete with that. That's great. If you go to Brown, it's a selection process. They're sorting people and connecting them to each other from whom they'll learn. For the rest of the 99% or the 95% or whatever it may be, we need to start as one way to do it is businesses, and some of them have said a higher ed degree is not the one gate you've got to get over to get here. There are other ones.
Hi, Kevin LeGrander from New York Institute of Technology and the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technology. So you've done some work, I know, in the past with educational institutions. One of the big sticking points, and I agree with you 100% on what you're recommending, it sounds like more interdisciplinary focus, more creative focus. And we've tried to do that at our institution, and we talk a good game, but the big problem is distribution of money and breaking down the silos. So the problem is that the monetary rewards still go to these silos instead of across boundaries of those silos. So any suggestions for getting that going?
Yeah, one of the things we did at one of the institutions I consulted for is you couldn't get advancement unless you were partnering with somebody else, whether it be in your research or in your classroom. So that sort of reward for the silo while talking about the multidisciplinary. Because let's face it, disciplinary is an artificial thing we made up. The world is not disciplinary. It doesn't break down that way, but we break it down that way in order to codify and transfer skills into students.
Yes, excellent presentation. We share some intellectual space in our focus on career development, on the individual as the driver of development. And I thought your models were very similar to some of the work in my field, postmodern career development and constructivist ideas. One of the questions is, does this put too much of the onus on individuals to be adapting and changing? Who are they adapting and changing to? And what is going to happen within the broader systems to make space for people?
I should have been clear about that. We've already shifted all the risk to the individual. So yeah, we've already done that, and in the future, if we don't do something, it's going to be to our detriment. So I think we may say we need new systems. It's not just new systems learning. We need a new social contract. Yeah.
David from UC Santa Cruz. I love this vision, and I'm really interested in understanding what are the first steps towards this vision. What do you see are the current initiatives that are already happening towards this, and what do you see as the most promising?
I see tiny little pockets of experimentation, and I don't think we can do enough of it. So if everybody in this room had the ability to effectuate a little pilot somewhere, that would be a good place to begin. I like on the K-12, the person who asked where on the K-12 example, I saw the Khan Lab School out in San Francisco, which is the Khan Academy. It's really for the affluent students whose parents work at Khan, but they organize students by independence level. Everybody's responsible for teaching as well as learning. They have a passion project, and they move through competencies. So you're not organized by age, which is as arbitrary as being organized by height or hair color. So we need to break up our systems, which is very difficult. So there are a number of people doing little experiments all over the place. Like Southern New Hampshire University created a competency-based program. For $10,000, you can get a bachelor's degree. You can do it in 6 months, or you can do it in 6 years. It's entirely up to you. So more of those experiments. We can't have enough of those going on.
Mark Owen again. What role do role models play in your view of the future?
Huge, because I think that a lot of this social support we need is you can access everything that you might ever need to know on edX, but it doesn't show you how to learn through failure. It doesn't show you the social and emotional support you're going to need to change and adapt. So I think we need many more mentoring models. We've lost them entirely in companies. Those are not there anymore. So I think it's incredibly important. Thank you for bringing that point up.
Marie Desjardins, University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I'm actually really glad to hear you mention kind of grit and resilience and some of those other skills. And I worry a lot about pressure from industry on institutions of higher education to focus more on skill-based learning. Like I need all of your graduates to know C++ or Spark or whatever the kind of hot tool du jour is. And what I find interesting is the faster those tools change, the more the industry seems to want universities to teach those things.
Yeah.
And the more impossible it becomes for universities to do that. And I actually think the less important it is for universities to do that because of what you just said, that those aren't going to be the skills 5 years from now. The other piece of it is, I think, as a university professor, I actually think the most important things that I teach my students are how to learn, how to work together, and how to become mature, responsible citizens of the world. And I don't think those things are easily replaceable in a sort of commodity-based, competency-based learning framework. And the move towards online education, I really think loses sight of a lot of those benefits. So I wonder how you
I think
all
that's
of
something
that
we need to
fits
figure
into
out.
this new framework.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. I think that's something we need to figure out because I agree with you on the skills. The value that you pay for should last at least as long as your debt. Let's make that the equation. So if you've got to learn a skill that expires in 6 months when your debt expires in 16 years, that's wrong. When I was working, I built a college at Philadelphia University to bring together design, engineering, and business, and that's sort of how I started on this journey. And they had me speak to people who employed our students. First year out of college, and I had about 5 conversations, and I said, I don't need to talk to any more people because they're all telling me they need better Excel skills. I said, we cannot be focusing on the entry point because the escalator's not there anymore. We need to be focusing on what are the skills they need over the course of their life. We need to teach them to learn. We need to teach them those skills and those qualities that are going to endure.
So I completely agree with you on virtually everything you're going through, and you'll certainly.
I love it when questions start that way.
This is a softball. No,
Yeah.
but it isn't. It's
No,
the
I
exact
bet
opposite,
it's not.
which is I don't know that supply and demand are the right way to think about this, but you're talking about sort of in a sense the supply side. So some of my companies have been in the HR tech space, and you just see this brutal reality that a recruiter gives you 5 seconds. They look at your name, your school, and your last job. So why is the right degree worth $50,000? Because that's the entry point to that process. And it doesn't matter what business school I go to, if I hear 2 students talking together, they're talking about how do they position themselves to get the right job at the right school. When my opinion, as someone who's never had to actually compete for a job in her life, is go build things, go do things, make the world a better place. People will come to you. But that probably doesn't scale. So what do you do in a world where we can wish for this? And believe me, my wife and I, she runs research for the San Francisco school system. What you're talking about is like our dream school that we talk about when we're
Well, let's build it.
because we're geeks. But how do you deal with the fact that the demand is, well, I didn't even get it right. It's first you do a search on LinkedIn for a skill. Then you do those 3 filtering criteria, none of which are remotely predictive of whether someone will be any good at the job.
How long are those companies lasting?
This is, we did the research, this is published research from before, but then we followed up with all of our users. These are sort of high value companies in terms of where people want to work. And all of our users exhibited the same behavior. They paid us a lot of money to know who to hire, and then the first things they looked at was a picture of the candidate, their university, and their last job.
It's hard to unlearn that. But I'm encouraged by some of the things that go on at Amazon. I think they also go on at Google where they screen for cultural fit and learning agility and adaptability, and some of the things I'm talking about takes much longer. But by the time a company has a need to the time they get need relief, I looked at this, it can be anywhere from 6 months to 18 months, depending on what industry you're in. That need is undoubtedly changed. So if you're hiring people based upon past skills and experience, soon that may become entirely irrelevant. So I'm hoping that that will sunset, but I understand as someone who never comes up on anybody's search.
So
Let's
can
take-
I?
The last question.
Thank you. Ioana Marinescu, economist at the University of Pennsylvania. This was really fascinating because here we're talking about artificial intelligence. I want to ask, what can artificial intelligence do for students and worker learners to enable a better career path? And I'm coming at this from having studied community college students making decisions about what major to take. And we showed that the biggest factor is what they like. So it's not just about getting a job. So my question is, can we design AI systems that would serve the whole purpose, including jobs and what we like and so on? So I'm interested, have you heard anything? And to you all in the room, I'm interested in studying this. So if you know anything, come see me. I'd love to study any pilot program that's being done in this area. Thanks.
There's someone who might be able to answer your question, but I have heard that there is this concept, and I'm not an AI person, so of stackable credentials that understand what you're good at and what you're interested in, and they steer you towards market value opportunities based upon your skills and interests, and then they stack up as opposed to arbitrarily picking a major, starting a debt-loaded process. So I'm hopeful.
Thank you.
Thanks.